Dr. Marcostas, welcome to Zen One Podcast. This is incredible to have you on this pod.
Good to see you, buddy. Good to see you. It hasn't been that long. It's just been a few weeks since I saw you in San Antonio. It was great to see your face in San Antonio.
And you saw my daughter too. It was fun.
Oh my gosh. That's a trip. She's a walking, talking human being now. And I had never met her before. So it was a real treat. I felt blessed to have been able to meet her. Thank you for bringing her.
Yeah, it was so much fun. And it was totally by accident. One of my friends who lives in San Antonio did not go on Friday, but then he wanted to go on Saturday to say hi to Mike Lamatan and Katrina. So because he used to work at their office. And I'm like, all right, let's go. And I had my daughter with me. So we came in and it was so much fun. Yeah. It's like the best when I can take kids to work. My dad used to do that to me when I was very little. He would always take me to work. And I learned so much just by being next to my dad.
Yeah. Yeah. That's special. She'll never forget that. I mean, being like watching you hustle, that gets ingrained in their heads. And, they're not fully formed yet. They always say that the last thing to develop fully in a human is the brain because big heads can't fit through the birth canal. So evolutionarily, we come out and everything is much more formed than the brain. And so she's still in the stage of her development where all of this stuff is developing and all these memories are getting imprinted and such an important time. It's so cool that you're able to spend that kind of time with her.
Yeah. And it's the freedom that we have. But anyway, I know we have only 2 hours left for this podcast. We're going to do Lex Friedman style. So I'm going to try to ask only 10 questions.
Okay. All right, man.
All right. You ready, Mark?
You got me, brother. You got me.
All right. So again, what I told you before, I really put together questions that I'm personally interested in.
Okay.
So if somebody wants to tune out, go ahead and do that. But one of the things that stuck with me is, like, you're very well known and you wrote a book. In 2016, you wrote a book called Pillars of Dental Success. Mm-hmm. And the book was dedicated to your parents.
Yeah.
When I read it, it says, if you don't mind, I'm going to read it.
Of course.
This book is dedicated to my parents, Percy and Asuncion. I hope I didn't butcher it.
No, that's correct. Asuncion.
Everything that I have and everything that I am, I owe to you. I love you both very much. I want to start there. What parents gave you early on in your life?
Yeah, you and I have a lot in common when it comes to this. I'm a first-generation American. You're a first-generation American. My dad and mom met in the Philippines. My dad was my mother's math professor at the University of the Philippines. So there is an age gap there, 12-year age gap. But he was a very successful math professor, also electrical engineer, doing very well in the Philippines. Huge families, both sides, lots of siblings, both sides. But in the late 1960s, they had the opportunity, my dad had the opportunity to immigrate to the United States with very little paperwork. It was called third preference. They were allowing nurses, doctors, architects, and engineers to immigrate to the United States without a lot of paperwork, basically a clear shot in. And even though he had a lot of colleagues that were qualified for this, including some of his colleagues at the university and some of his colleagues at the company that he was working at as an electrical/mechanical engineer, even though he had a lot of people that could have qualified, those people were doing fine in the Philippines, so they decided that they were going to stay. But my dad had this vision to come to the United States, the land of opportunity, to create a brighter future for his family, even though it would be basically starting over again. So they came to the United States in the late 60s, started in Chicago, and then got the dream job, got hired with IBM as an electrical/mechanical engineer. And that brought them across the country from Chicago to New York to Denver, Colorado, Boulder, Colorado, Tucson, Arizona to Southern California. But all the while, I just kind of always was watching my dad's hustle. He had an unbelievable work ethic, and it was pretty early on, maybe in my early teens, when I recognized the sacrifices that they had made for us. Very frugal when it came to lifestyle. We could have lived a much quote unquote richer lifestyle. We could have been in a different neighborhood. Although they did well, we were upper middle class, but we could have been more liberal with the way that they spent their money. But they were very conservative, and they taught us really, really good values, hardworking values, and a lot about entrepreneurship. I always felt as though my dad kind of squished his entrepreneurial dreams because he had such a good job and he wanted to provide security for our family. I was good enough to put, my sister through college and get me a head start in college. I ended up paying for the vast majority of my college education. But what I learned from them was all about, family values, all about work ethic, sacrifice, family first. They were incredible. They were incredible parents to have, considering where they had come from. Like literally, you've heard the story and you've lived this. Actually, my dad came to the United States with knowing nobody, with a suitcase and like $150, and 70% of his paychecks went back to my mom and my sister in the Philippines until he could afford enough money to get a decent apartment, send for them, pay for their one-way air tickets. And that was the sole primary focus with the first bit of money that he was able to scratch together. So, and my mom was incredible as far as the sacrifices that she made. She had not finished her degree, but she finished her degree after they had moved here to the United States, and worked for a bit until it became obvious that my dad was going to be able to support us without her working full time. So yeah, I can't say enough about how I was raised and the lessons that I learned. But I mean, it's interesting because it falls upon deaf ears if you don't have the right character traits and the right values, right? And they instilled that into me very early. I see lots of kids nowadays that take their parents for granted, and they don't recognize the sacrifices and hard work that goes into, a certain lifestyle that they live. But my parents were really good at instilling those values and building my character, really.
You have a conference, you own dental offices, but I'm really curious, what do you think most people don't know about you, or maybe even get wrong about you?
Yeah, I mean, I do my best to start most of my talks with this, but honestly, this is the God's honest truth. The only reason I'm qualified to say anything to anybody on stage, in a book, on a podcast, is because I've made more mistakes than anybody else that I know. I've owned 16 dental practices. I don't know if you knew this, but I sold the last 4 about a year ago. So I no longer am a dental practice owner, but that was my lab. And, my first 6 dental practices, I thought that I was God's gift to entrepreneurship. Turns out that a lot of that had to do with the fact that I got lucky and I had really great associates and really good office managers. And as I started to lose them in certain practices, I realized, holy cow, this had very little to do with me and my, business prowess. It was more due to the strength of the people that I had working for me. So after I started losing some key people, I recognized that, man, I had to really, really ramp up my level of sophistication, my own personal level of knowledge when it came to running a business. And it took years. It takes years to realize, what you don't know. So many entrepreneurs just don't even know what they don't know. And I feel like I'm finally starting to get a grasp on like the whole big picture, from leadership to culture to human resources, personnel, communication. The dollars and cents of it, I can teach somebody in an afternoon, but you have to really dedicate a serious amount of time to human beings and how they work and how you work effectively with them. You have to do a lot of personal reflection on your own kind of style and the way that you are appearing and the way you're coming off to certain people, and how to build tight connections and build loyalty and show loyalty and empathy without getting walked all over. So, I mean, I think what, back to answer your question, what most people don't maybe understand or know about me is that it wasn't a God-given gift. It was persistence, and it was just learning from every mistake that I made, and I made many, that kind of led me down this path. And I'm so lucky. I mean, I'm so blessed in so many ways that, you know, from a person that barely got into dental school, 21 tries,
21 attempts,
one acceptance, to being able to have, you know, the privilege of speaking to thousands of people every single day on the podcast. I mean, for goodness sakes, I was just at Thrive in front of 2,500 people, and I interviewed Stanley Bergman, the CEO of Thrive, CEO of Henry Schein, $14 billion company. He's worth $630 million himself. Had the opportunity to speak to him on stage for the second time. I've spoken to, you know, Olympians, professional athletes, New York Times bestselling authors, Navy SEALs, race car drivers, and everybody that's relevant in dentistry. I've just been so blessed in so many ways, and it really, really had nothing to do with God-given gifts. It was all blessings and luck and persistence.
Interesting. What do you think is your, like, a red switch in your operating system? Like, when somebody pushes the wrong button, what would that wrong button look like to you when you say, you know what, I'm going to flip it and make sure you guys know that I can deliver?
Yeah, I mean, listen, you know, Alex Hormozy says, when you're on the come up, everybody roots for you because you're the underdog. And when you finally achieve some level of notoriety, some level of success, then people immediately flip the switch and start resenting you, and you actually start picking up haters and people that criticize you for the things that got you to where you were in the first place. Things that they used to praise you for, now they're criticizing you for. I used to get extremely offended when people would say negative things about me. I have, you know, in my fifth decade of life, I've learned a lot. A lot of that is patience and thick skin, the ability to take criticism with a grain of salt, the ability to recognize when somebody is resentful because they haven't gotten there yet, or they have not developed the ability to see that somebody can get there where they want to get in, you know, on their own merit and with high character and without cheating anybody else. And that comes down to a scarcity versus an abundance mindset. But I will say that when somebody attacks me or criticizes me and kind of goes after my character or the character of somebody that I care about or the character that of somebody that I know is an honest person of integrity, I get very, very defensive, and I switch into a different mode.
Like a Goggins mode?
Kind of. But at the same time, I also recognize that, hey, listen, I can't control what everybody else thinks about me. I can only control my own behavior and my own reaction to what they're saying. So I try not to allow people to have that type of power over me, right? Actually, I was watching an interview with Mike Tyson, and he was talking about, like, when somebody says something about you and it affects you, or it creates any kind of reaction in you, they've actually accomplished what they were trying to do. They've changed you fundamentally as a person. So they've accomplished their goal. What you have to do is recognize what they're saying, and you have to be able to move on without that changing you fundamentally, your character and your behavior. So I have to go with that, even though I haven't mastered it yet.
Oh, I mean, we're all trying to master things, but I'm curious. If you mentioned fifth decade, is there anything that you knew that you were, even when you were 20 or 30? Like, there's common sense that we all know about, but then for some reason, it finally hit you, like, at a 40 or like in the fifth decade. Like, is there anything like that you're like, yeah, that thing?
Yeah, you know what's funny is one of the big realizations that is slow coming to me was that I like an early part of my career all came down to like imposter syndrome and not believing that I actually belonged in a room. And that a lot of that came from the fact that I barely got into the profession at all. And then when I got into the profession, I always had in the back of my mind, even in dental school, all these people are smarter than me. They're all going to be more successful than me. I have to work 3 times as hard just to keep up with them. And if I get to their level of success, then it'll be a successful career because I don't deserve to be here in the first place. But then I realized that like, okay, I'm going to work 3 times as hard as them. If they had God-given gifts and they didn't have to study as hard as I did in order to get straight A's, and I had to work 3 times as hard for, maybe a high C average or a low B average, that was actually a gift because I was learning to work harder. I was learning to innovate. I was learning how to figure out how to hang in there. And those character traits actually spill over into other areas of your life. They spill over into, being able to work out, get up early every single morning because you get used to working harder than everybody else. You get used to kind of getting the door slammed in your face. So you learn a lot of tenacity and that character trait. So I realized that, holy cow, like nobody is better than anybody else. We're all given what we're given and we have to figure out what it is that we need to do to get to the next level. And for some people, like academics is really easy for them, but because they never developed a work ethic in academics, they have to develop a work ethic in other areas or business is going to chew them up and spit them out. And I figured that out. Like a lot of people, when academics came too easy for them, they didn't become a successful business person because they never learned, the character trait of like just grinding as hard as you can just to keep up. So early in my career, everything was based on insecurity and trying to keep up and making sure that I showed everybody that got better grades than I was worthy just to hang with them. And then it turned out that, holy cow, like we're all on equal footing and we all just have to figure out our own path to get to the next level. And we also had to define what the next level is. Like when I say that, like, hey, I was able to accomplish XYZ in dentistry, for some people that I graduated dental school with, a single practice that's well run, that affords them a particular lifestyle and puts all of their kids through college, that's perfect for them. That's success. And I would never say that I'm more successful than anybody else. I had a different viewpoint and a different kind of vision of what I wanted to accomplish. And I'm still marching towards it, So I haven't gotten there yet. I haven't accomplished what I want to accomplish yet. So what's happened is now my mindset has shifted from a scarcity and insecurity mindset to I'm doing this because I've learned over the decades that anything basically is possible if I put my mind to it. The only thing that I really regret in the beginning is the fact that I didn't surround myself with mentors early enough and I set my sights too low, because I see people that nowadays that really kind of have a good, clear vision and a good plan in place are able to accomplish things much earlier than I was able to during their career path.
Can you elaborate on that?
I mean, it's not that hard to be able to look out there right now, nowadays, Tiger. This particular generation is interesting, right? I don't even know what they call them. They call them Zs now, Ys or Zs or whatever generation they're.
I'm lost.
I'm lost too. I mean, it was the millennials for a bit, and now it's Gen Z, I think. Whatever generation they're called, it doesn't matter. There are a couple generalized traits about them, right? They're lazy, they're overly sensitive. They are the offspring of helicopter parents that never let them like experience any kind of disappointment, because if they're getting a B+, they'd come in and they'd yell at the teacher and the teacher would just be like, all right, I'll give them an A, right? So they think that they're successful, or they think that their mommy or somebody is going to be able to take care of them for the rest of their life. This is an entitled generation. This is just generally speaking. This is what people say about this generation. I'm not judging. This is just in general what people say about this generation. However, this generation has created, for whatever reason, a fair percentage of really, really young billionaires. and multi-millionaires and people that have figured out how to make money online without ever having a real job. So there's this dichotomy of like uber successful people in this generation and people that are super entitled and not willing to put in the work to get to where they need to get, right? So there's this gap in like this generation between the successful people and the wallflowers. And like the people that have become successfthey they're an interesting case study. You can easily just say, oh, they got lucky. They've been coding since they were 9 years old. They had a good kind of skill set early on, and they were able to lean into that skill set, and now that's why they own they're a $1 billion founder. But there's something else that goes into that we haven't figured out yet. A lot of that has to do with, I think, having a really clear vision. And as rudimentary as their plan was, they had a plan. They executed it. There's a level of tenacity and stick-to-itiveness that made the perfect kind of recipe for where they are now. And then the rest of that generation could look to them as, as role models, but a lot of them don't.
Yeah.
A lot of them don't.
It's interesting. The reason I rolled my eyes as soon as you said, set maybe higher goals or have higher expectations, it reminded me of the book. I think 10 years ago, I read the book by Ted Turner. It's called Call Me Ted. And it's audiobook. It's amazing. Like, I think he narrates the book himself, and it's the funny way he starts the book. And he says, when you watch your net worth go down by about 100 million a minute or a day because of the merger with AOL and all that, he's like, it's a really tough feeling. But I'll let you actually read the book to see what he says at the end. It's a funny story. But the reason I go there is in the book, he mentions his dad, and he says that there's something happened. I don't remember exactly, but something happened to his dad. But when he got a little bit older and he had a chance to go back and think about his dad's life, he said the number one reason his dad, whatever happened to him, was that he didn't set the high goals. Everything he wanted to accomplish, he accomplished, and he got bored at the end. So, and that's why for Ted Turner, he constantly wanted to set higher goals. Like, we can't afford to buy billboards. He bought additional ones, right? So he couldn't afford to buy a company in Atlanta. He bought it. He couldn't afford to start CNN back when it was just getting started, when the news wasn't a thing, but somehow he pulled it off and did it. So he was constantly trying to chase higher goals because he was afraid that his life will be like miserable towards the end because he would set too low of goals.
That makes sense. I got to read that book. I just wrote it down. I am a voracious
it's
reader
really fun.
of biographies. I love biographies.
It's an incredible biography.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorites. I actually reread it 2 or 3 times, but I put on Audible. It's fun to listen to him talk.
Yep.
I'm really curious, Mark, since we're talking about the changes and stuff. So is there anything in the last 2 years that you changed your mind on?
I mean, if we're talking about dentistry, yeah, there's a lot that I've changed my mind on. Life in general, yeah, there's things. As far as dentistry goes, and it's not, I can't say that it was in the last couple of years, but this has been an evolution. When I used to speak and talk in front of audiences, I was all about the numbers and all about overhead and all about being as lean as possible. And I still completely believe in that focus and that's necessary. But what I've considered over the last handful of years is that it's really important to have redundancies in your operation, or else you experience what we call golden handcuffs, right? So I used to think it was completely acceptable to have a 3, 4, or 5 operatory practice. In fact, if you look at my 16 dental practices, a good percentage of them one of them was 3 operatories, a few of them were 4 ops, and a lot of them were 5 ops. And if I was to tell a young dentist nowadays, like, make that thing as big as possible after demographic research and after you make sure that you can qualify for the loan and after you've done all of that stuff, but a minimum of 7 operatories, because you have to build in redundancies there, because if you're the only provider, then you will never have true freedom and you don't have a real business, right? So if you're the only dental provider with the exception of 3 hygienists and you're in 5 operatories and you're slogging it away and your overhead is 45% and your 30% profitability, good for you. That's a very, very attractive practice, but it's not a real business because you are not only the main cook, in this restaurant, you're also, the chief marketing officer and the office manager and,
HR person,
HR, everything else you're responsible for. So this is actually a good practice, but you'll never have freedom. When you want to go on a 3-week cruise or you want to take a month sabbatical away from dentistry because you've been doing it hard for 25 years, you're unable to do that without completely shutting off the revenue source. So that's a big thing that has come to my realization, is that redundancy is actually freedom, right? There's a lot of people that talk about the lifestyle practice nowadays, and they talk a lot about what I talked about in the beginning, is keeping things as simple as possible. Maybe 1 office manager, 1 front office, maybe 2 out front office, 2 assistants, 1 or 2 hygienists. That's cool, but you are very vulnerable to that human being leaving, getting sick, getting transferred, and you alone are going to be responsible for the actual main production in the dental practice. So I think the new lifestyle practice has to be a minimum of 2 providers, a minimum of 7 operatories, a minimum of 3 to 4 hygienists, as many redundancies as possible that the business can tolerate, so that you actually do have true freedom and you can manage that thing and your personal production becomes an option. And if you love clinical dentistry, I would never encourage you to stop. But the fact is, you can stop if you need to. I've had 2 back surgeries in my career. I didn't have the option to stop. I did not have the option to stop. I took 9 days off for 2 back surgeries. I should have taken 6 weeks off for those 2 back surgeries, but I was the primary provider in one of my practices at that time. And the income, the revenue would have stopped completely and people would have gone without paychecks if I didn't come in earlier than my doctor suggested. And it's just it's something that has come around in my reality, that, and this is kind of how I teach now, redundancies are really important. So you have to build a strong enough business so that you could build those redundancies into there, right? So I wouldn't add another associate or add on to a practice if my overhead was 85%. First, you got to get the overhead down to 50%, and then you have the flexibility to bankroll addition, or you can easily bring on another dental provider, et cetera. That's it. For as far as the dental business, that is something that I've changed my outlook on. Additionally, I do believe that the consolidation wave is coming. I do believe that. So if you are a one-off dental practice, DSOs used to be the devil. Like, we can try our very best to fight the DSO wave, or, continue to say that it's the evil empire, or we can just say, all right, how can I make myself the best acquisition target possible? Whether or not I ever sell to a DSO, that's a decision I'll make when the time comes. But I don't want to eliminate the potential of maybe 50%, 60%, 70% of the buying pool when I'm ready to transition out of dentistry. I want to be an attractive target to them, as well as maybe a dentist or a couple that wants to buy my dental practice or group of dental practices. I don't want to pigeonhole myself so I'm only able to sell to one type of buyer. I want to be attractive to all different types of buyers. That's another thing that I've changed my tune on as far as the dental profession. As far as my own personal life and life in general, man, I worked so hard, dude. I worked so many years of 60 to 80 hour weeks. I missed a lot when it came to my kids growing up and their development. Looking back, I can't say that I regret anything, because that's not healthy and it's not productive to regret anything, because I can't go back and change anything. But I would say that I would have structured things differently. Like, if I needed to work a 60 to 70 hour week, I would have made sure that I defined my non-negotiables and I didn't miss certain things in my family, with my family and my family's life. everything in that I see is really binary out there. Like people have to say to you like, all right, well, you're working 60-hour weeks. So you're focusing on your business at the expense of your family, or you're focusing on your family at the expense of growing your business. It's either one thing or the other. You're either a great family man or you're a great business person. I truly believe that you can walk both kind of in both areas. You can be both. You can have it all, but you have to structure it correctly, right? You have to say, all right, for the next 3 months, I have this new practice starting. I'm going to have to put in 60 to 70-hour weeks. Here are the non-negotiables within my schedule. You're going to have a discussion with your spouse or significant other and say, hey, look, if you'll give me a little grace for the next 90 days, I'm going to be working really, really hard. I commit to these things. And you set the ground rules before this phase of your year, and you live within those parameters. You have the integrity to live within those parameters. And if you can do that, you can save that primary relationship. You can make sure that things don't go awry with your family, and you can still work hard. And then when the season comes, when things lighten up a little bit, the startup is starting to kind of run itself, and you can take your foot off the gas a little bit. Recognize when those times are, and actually define when those times are going to be. Take your foot off the gas and allow yourself that season without the guilt, right? Now I can work a regular 35-hour week like every other dentist in the world, and I don't have to feel guilty about that because of the previous 3 months that I put in. But then when the next big project comes up, there's another season. I'm going to have a talk with my significant other, and we're going to plan through this. So that's kind of one of the things that I learned over the years. I was either all or nothing. And it was years of grinding myself to a nub. That's not good for yourself. That's not good for your personal health. And it's not good for your personal relationships. That's for sure.
Yeah. I think the challenge there, Mark, is what I'm seeing now with having a kid is it's so easy to look and say, well, I missed the morning or I missed the evening when I didn't read the book to her. You can quantify that. You can put in a box and say, I missed those 30 minutes or an hour. But it's really, really difficult to say, look, I'm going to do 10 sales calls and I'm going to land a customer, or I'm going to put in an extra 20 hours and that will guarantee me that it will add $1 million to my net worth. Like that side is so hard to measure.
It is. Because
you can't quantify that. But the side that we miss out on is easy to measure. And that's why I think it just wrecks the brain for a lot of people.
It does. It does. And again, I think you have to give yourself grace, right? I think that if you can commit to that 2 times a week, reading that story to her 2 times a week and make it very special, and you're extremely, extremely focused on her and not distracted for those 2 days, that's better than 5 days when you're checking your phone the whole time and just going through the motions because you have other things that you need to attend to. So again, like there is a compromise for everything. And I would say that, most kids just want an attentive, dedicated parent, and 7 days a week reading the story, when you're half there, is probably less valuable than 3 times a week when you're fully present and planning every single bit of that out. I would also say that, if those phases of your life and phases, what I call seasons of your career, aren't recognized and spoken about and planned with your personal relationships, that's when things start to go awry, and that's when resentments start to take place, right? It's like, all right, I'm going to have to travel for this next 2 months because of this, for the next 3 months after that. And you're actually planning, and you fully intend to, to give that time that you're promising in return for this particular sacrifice, right? So it's easy for me to look back now and say I would have done things slightly differently or whatever, because things worked out great. They worked out great. I still have, my family is still intact. My kids love me. They're getting to the point now where they're just like, wow, we really appreciate the sacrifices you made, and we respect your standing in the business community. That's a great feeling, dude. And that doesn't always happen. What happens a lot is that there's only resentment, and there's this feeling like you traded this G-Wagon or this private jet or this yacht for my love or attention to me. I'm very lucky in that none of that happened. And, but it was just dumb luck because I worked really, really hard for a lot of years.
I also want to give a little plug to Leslie because I know her personally, that probably when you were not present, she was giving them the right messages in their heads.
Yeah.
So that when you were at home, it was all like consistent. So
it's true.
Leslie is amazing.
Yeah. Thank you, brother.
I want to just quickly go to, I know we're short on time. I want to go to quickly to one more thing. And then we're going to wrap up with one more question. But with coaching, since you talked about what you change your mind on, what do you tell young dentists? So if somebody comes to you and they have a practice, they're about to hit the ground running, and they say, Mark, I want to be like you, what would you say?
Yeah, it's funny. I get that a lot, actually, and it's flattering and it's a privilege to be able to talk people through that. But you know, when I'm talking to a D2 or a D3 and they're like, "I want 15 practices. Here's what that looks like," I'm like, "Okay, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna let's first of all figure out where it is that you want to live. Let's find a great demographic that could support that. And if that's the case, let's take this in stages, right? So what I did was completely the wrong thing. I found the right demographic. That's true. But what I did was I had one practice. I wanted to get to 10. I had 10 in my mind. Like I was not going to be satisfied until I got to 10. And that was a very unsophisticated, immature attitude at the time because there was no parameters to like when I would buy the next one or like what that practice looked like. I mean, like I was saying, I had 3 operatory practices, 4 operatory practices, and I was expanding before I would get one business, one practice solid and profitable. So I was adding for the sake of adding, right? So I would say, let's focus on a flagship practice that is beautiful and profitable and you love being there. And we're going to call that your flagship practice. Michael Gerber would call it your franchise prototype. We'll make it perfect first. And you're going to learn all the levers to push and pull. You're going to understand how a dollar flows through your practice. You're going to understand overhead and profitability and EBITDA. And you're going to know the marketing strategies that work for this particular demographic, how much ROI you're getting for every marketing dollar that you send out into the world, how to be a good leader and to lead your team, how to create a strong culture within that practice. Learn all of that stuff and master it in one practice. If after that you have a black belt level practice and you still have the desire to scale and move on to the next, then I say, by all means, now is the time to find another and replicate your perfect practice again and again and again. But not until you can master that first one. Can we agree to that? Give me your handshake on that we will not expand until you make your perfect practice. And we actually have an exercise that's called the ideal practice exercise. Like, what's your overhead going to be? How many operatories is it going to be? What community is it going to be in? What percentage PPO versus fee for service is it going to be? How many hygienists are you going to have? What's the decor look like? So they write all this out in a manifesto so they can visualize exactly what that looks like. And they will make it so. And if you change your ideas along the lines and it doesn't end up exactly like that, that's fine. But we're going to start with this ideal vision. Once we get to that or some version of this ideal vision, then we can talk about expansion. But so much goes into that as well. You know, you and I, you know about the 4 futures, mind, meaning, muscle, and money. That has evolved over the years. And that is something that we look towards as far as creating a good lifestyle outside of business, right? So your mindfulness, how able are you to handle stress on a daily basis? What does your internal dialogue sound like? Are you overall a happy or a depressed person? Are you optimistic, pessimistic? What's your mindset? Are you abundance minded or are you scarcity minded? That's the first thing that we work on. And then meaning, your personal relationships. How strong are your personal relationships? Do you have a legacy plan for the people that you love? Your muscle, like how fit are you? Are you, and how are you going to define that? What kind of fuel are you putting into your body? How much are you drinking? What kind of sleep are you getting? Your diet, your exercise, all of that. That's the muscle quadrant. And then the money quadrant is the last thing. So you master the 4 futures. you master what it looks like to have your ideal practice. You start marching towards those ideals every day, and you're going to avoid a lot of the headaches that I had and heartbreak, frankly, that I had during my career.
Okay. Moving forward, I think it's interesting to watch you, as you mentioned, that you sold all of the practices and going from 16 to 0. I'm sure people could assume that now you have nothing to do, which, I mean, it's hard to imagine.
Yeah.
But I'm really curious, what's next? And I genuinely mean that, not just like, well, you know, I can't imagine you in the beach or anything like that, but I'm sure you have big goals. Yeah. And now your boys are growing up, right? So like you have 3 like amazing kids. Like every time I see them, they're like, it's just fun to shake their hands. You know, it's like they're good dudes. And so I wonder what's really next for you in the next maybe 10 years, if you can share.
Yeah, of course. I have very definitive goals. I've been writing for the last 2 years. I've been writing a non-dentally related book. So I continue to plug away at that. I have no monetization idea for that. I just want to get a lot of my ideas in print and released. I want a formal publisher. I would love to hit one of the big lists someday. And it's about a lot of the things that I've learned as an entrepreneur and as a man coming up as a first generation American. That's one thing that I continue to work on. I'm also launching a DSO. So some of the best practices inside DSI are going to be rolled up into a DSO. We have some private equity funding. And we're going to continue to roll up our best assets, our best practices, our black belt level practices into what I believe is going to be one of the strongest DSOs in dentistry. You have to be a DSI coaching member in order to qualify for us to purchase your practice. We want to be able to purchase practices at a very high valuation because they're going to be very, very well-run practices because they will have been with us for a period of time. So that is the next iteration of what I'm focusing on. It's a whole new world, man, dealing with private equity and banking at a high level. When you're dealing with 9-figure deals, the conversations change. So this is just part of my evolution and part of the next thing that I want to focus on. What we realize is that we're helping people build these perfect practices to sell, practices that could fetch a really high valuation, that were very, very low in overhead, high in profitability, in the best demographics, like the best practices in the country. And when they were ready to transition and take some chips off the table, we were just sending them out into the world to contact any given DSO out there. And that was not the right solution. So we're continuing to do the work of getting people to build the strongest practices they can to achieve the highest exit valuation as possible. But now we have an option where they can stay with us and they can work in a DSO with their friends in a C-suite that they know and trust. So that's the next big, maybe the biggest project that I've ever undertaken.
That is pretty cool. I have a feeling that even when you talk to these big people with private equity and banking, I have a feeling it all comes down to one basic thing, is like being a human and just still like connecting with people on a human level, right?
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. So a lot of these private equity guys, it's weird. I mean, these are people that have billions of dollars at their disposal. They're like, oh yeah, I've listened to your podcast for years. It's like, that's really cool. Thank you. So you're right. At a human level, everybody's the same. Whether or not you could write a check for $1 billion or, $100,000, these are just people that have the same concerns, and the same challenges that we all have. Yeah,
it's amazing. Well, Mark, thank you so much. I know you got to run. So there's a lot of questions that I want to ask you in the future, but this was awesome. I appreciate even the 40 minutes that I got.
Let's do a part 2 if you can.
Let's do it. I'm in. I have a couple more questions.
Yeah. And you can add some new ones and I'll ask you some questions too. That'd be fun.
Yeah. Let's do in person.
All right,
That's where I shine, in person.
All right, dude.
All right. Sounds good.
Great to see you, buddy.
Thank you, Mark.
For your time, bud. I'll talk to you soon.